I should probably admit, given Joshua's very interesting presentation, that my teams were also responsible for building some of the biggest plastics factories on the planet, all throughout Asia. But the world has moved on and things need to change. I'm going to talk about a hub program that we have at Arizona State University with our partners. And this is going to come in two parts. The first part, I'm just going to remind you what the hubs program in the United States is. And then I'm going to say a little bit about our particular project. And this topic area 2, phase 1 feed, I'll explain that when we get there. So jumping right in, as a reminder, the hubs program came out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, so-called bill, that was passed in November of 2021. And it specifically set out $3.5 billion for building a hubs program for carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, carbon capture and storage. It is built around 3 phases of work. The first phase, phase 0, and it's interesting they chose to start with 0, but phase 0 is a feasibility stage. Basically, this is kind of a planning, early stage planning. Phase 1, which is a design phase, and then phases 2 through 4 are build phases. So it's important to know that these hubs come in different flavors. The intention was that there would be phase 0 about 0 to 12, phase 1 0 to 8, phase 2 0 to 2, and 3 and 4 0 to 2. And that was the idea, and you can see the amount of money that was available in the maximum DOE share and then the cost share. Cost share was in most cases 1-to-1. Very importantly, there is a very big Justice 40 component in the hubs program. And as a reminder, Justice 40 was an executive order that President Biden signed very early after he came into office. And it requires that 40% of the benefit of any federal program, 40% of the benefit from the federal share, must go to certain kinds of communities, typically disadvantaged communities in some sense of that definition. It is integral to this hubs program and a lot of other federal programs. So on August the 11th, 2023, almost 2 years later, they actually announced what these air capture hubs are going to be. The big winners, the Topic Area 3 awards, were 2 that are in the southern part of the United States. The Project Cypress, which is with Climeworks and Heirloom Technologies, and it's in Louisiana. And then the South Texas DAC Hub, which is with Point 5, a subsidiary of Occidental, and Carbon Engineering. And I think we had some carbon engineering folks here, did we? Yeah, there she is. Yeah. So you actually should be the one up here talking about this, not me, because you guys got the big prize. And at some point in time, we have to chat about how things are going. But that's the program. Now, that was the top level. These are Topic Area 3s. Phase 2. Yours was a phase 2? I think it was phase 2. So this is Topic Area 2. These are the ones that are the design level, not the build, but the design level. And you can see there were 5 of them, of which the Southwest Direct Air Capture Hub, the one that I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about, was part of this group. And then there were about 14 that were selected in the Topic Area 1, the lowest level, the investigate level. So this is a basic outline of what our hub is. You can see there are quite a number of partners. Arizona State University serves as the prime for this award, and I'm the principal investigator for that. But we also have other universities, New Mexico Tech and the University of Utah, They are part of this partnership because we're actually looking at 3 different locations in the Southwest, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But those locations are in Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. So those are the locations, and I'll give you a little more detail about this momentarily. But we're also coming in with 2 different technologies for direct air capture. One is a company by the name of Carbon Collect, which is a spin out of Arizona State University. It is literally the brainchild of Dr. Lochner, who's looking at his phone as we speak because he knows all about this stuff. That was mean. And the other is Carbon Capture, which is a spin out of Idea Labs. That is a Bill Gross enterprise. And they're doing most of their work at the moment in California, but they're a partner in our hub. We want to be entirely driven by renewable energy. So solar, wind, and battery and electricity storage. The idea then is you capture the CO2 using low carbon energy. The bulk of it goes into storage in one of these locations. But we are looking at a number of different partners that will be interested in conversion of that carbon. And you heard some of the earlier presenters talking about ways in which you might do that. Now, the sites are controlled by other entities, not the universities. Proton Green is in Arizona. That's Carbon Collect. Where is Tallgrass? Tallgrass controls the New Mexico site, and the Utah site is on state land. Then Black & Veatch is our general contractor because this is front-end engineering and design. So that's the basic structure of the project from a partnership standpoint. This is the diagram of where the sites are actually located. So there are 3 locations. Paradox Basin, which you can see extends into actually 4 states across the Four Corners area. But the place we're looking at is southeastern Utah. And that's an area not far from the Navajo Nation. It's not actually on the nation, and it's very sparsely populated. The second site is the St. John's Dome in Arizona. That area is, again, relatively sparsely populated, but there are 3 small communities that are in the general area of that location, including St. John's. And then the final is in the San Juan Basin, which is New Mexico. And this is a big oil and gas province. So there's quite a lot of activity there. Again, not a lot of large communities. We have got basic geophysical work done in all of these places, but more work needs to be done. And that'll be part of the project. None of these have an approved Class 6 well. Now, let me back up here and say that if you are going to inject CO2 for storage purposes, you must have permission for a Class 6 well. That is specifically for re-injecting CO2. There are only at the moment 3 in the United States. They're in Indiana and 2 in Illinois. But all of these states and many others are now all progressing towards getting that kind of permitting. The legal frameworks are also not in place in Arizona and in New Mexico. That is in Utah. And when I say legal framework, the key things there are some of the things you've heard. Liability, and Klaus talked about that, as did several others of you. If you put it in the ground, who's liable for it? And that needs to be part of a legal framework that makes that clear. How do you do monitoring and verification? That's another big issue, and that needs to be in legal statutes, at least in my opinion. And then finally, something as simple as who owns the pore space in the ground where you're pumping the CO2 in? That also needs to be clarified. None of these states have got that all in good order, although Utah is probably most advanced. So I mentioned that we have 2 carbon capture technologies. Carbon capture, the company Carbon Capture, is only recently been coming out of stealth mode, probably about the last 12 to 18 months. So they are quite judicious about what they say about their technology. What I do know about it, most of what I know is under NDA, so I can't say a great deal. But it is a sorbent. They're clear about that. And they also blow air. So they move the air across their sorbent, and then they have a mechanism for regenerating the sorbent by releasing the CO2, and they have mechanisms for doing that. Carbon Collect, on the other hand, you'll see is quite an odd looking design. There are no blowers at all. This is a completely passive design. And what I mean by that is you can see those plates inside of that stack that's pulled up. And on the surface of those plates are sorbents that can capture the CO2. So rather than blow air through a container, you literally lift the stack up, expose the sorbent to the air, and then you lower it back down to release the CO2. Both of these companies have verified their technologies at scale or semi-scale. This would be, in the case of Carbon Collect, that is more or less the scale at which they intend to manufacture. So they're looking at many mass manufactured systems. A big part, and you heard this earlier from several of our speakers, but most notably today from Sophie and from Holly, the extraordinary importance of working with communities. In part, the Justice 40 requires that, but more importantly, these things could be quite big perturbations in these communities. Not on the actual living conditions, because they're all located quite distant from the actual community, but in terms of the economies. All four the states, that Four Corners area, has coal plants that are closing. There are about 6 major coal stations in that region that are closing, along with mines in some cases. So there's a big transition coming in the economic conditions of those communities. And there's a lot of effort going on by many groups of people. Arizona State University is heavily involved in the St. John's Dome area for the purposes of addressing how do they transform these communities, transition away from coal and coal-fired power plants.